We're good.
Good evening, Hopkinton. Welcome to the November 19th, 2020 Hopkinton School Committee meeting. It's good to see everyone. We saw you on Monday and we're back again. Welcome to the meeting. At this time, I would like to invite anyone who is able to rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Do we have any recognitions tonight? I know we just met on Monday, so no. Hearing none, we'll move on to public comment. We did not receive any emails marked public comment that I know of. Nancy or Meg or Joe, did you see any?
I did not.
Okay. So that brings us to reports, and we are lucky tonight. We are starting budget presentations, and we have with us Dr. Zaleski, and I don't know, Dr. Kavanaugh, if you want to say anything in advance, or move right in?
I think we are all ready for Dr. Zaleski's FY22 special education budget.
Perfect. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So what I've posted on the screen is my FY22 executive summary. So what I want to do is take a few moments to go through that, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. So the basic overview of the budget is my FY22 budget is $12,107,616, and this number includes both requested positions as well as an increase of 3.6% from the FY21 budget of $11,681,763. So this increase is reflected in salaries and expenses. So what I did was I itemized in the personnel summary salaries, and the FY22 budget reflects an increase of $383,833, and this number does include positions that were already added in FY21 of $46,876. And then the FY22 requested new positions of $238,991. It also includes ESY teacher and specialist increase, which I'll speak to in a moment, as well as step lane and negotiated increases of $97,806. And then the cost of the ESY teacher and specialist increase does support potential program extension for students with high needs. And the new position requested $239,991 to meet student needs across the district, pre-K to 12, and into the 18 to 22 program. So these are the adjustments that were made in FY21 to FY22. A .1 special education paraprofessional at Hopkins School. We had shifted a C-level paraprofessional to a B-level paraprofessional to support student service delivery needs with a .1 ask. I added a 1.0 special education paraprofessional to our 18 to 22 program, and I utilized 240 grant funding. So when I wrote the grant this summer, I had allocated this funding into the grant for this purpose. We have 7 students in the program right now, and with the varying needs, we needed this position to make sure those students could be out in the community as much as possible in light of the pandemic, as well as be able to address the remote needs of students in the hybrid model as well. And then we have the COVID-funded 1.2 nurse positions as district-wide. So that is comprised of 2 additional folks who are working with us and helping the nursing staff, in light of the situation that we're in. And the new positions requested. So tonight I'm requesting a .5 intensive teacher at the Marathon School. This intensive position supports our growing student needs at this level. These students that we're having next year is going to put each teacher at about a caseload of 10 and 10, and which is a pretty large number for little ones at this level. So we feel right now we have 1.5 instructors at that level for students with intensive needs, and with the .5 ask, that would give 2 intensive instructors to assist the students. And with that, we've also asked for an additional ABA paraprofessional support to support students with needs at this level as well. I am asking for 2 ABA paraprofessionals at the high school. We have a student who had returned to district that is going to need support as they enter into the high school next year, as well as a student with significant intensive needs coming up from 8th grade into 9th. So these two positions will be supporting those students as they come up through the grade spans. I am asking for a 1.0 BCBA district-wide, and the reason for this ask is right now we have Board Certified Behavior Specialist, which is what that stands for, BCBA, for those of you that might not know what that means in the community watching tonight. We have a BCBA at the Marathon School, and we have a BCBA at the Elmwood School. And our third BCBA is spread across grades 4 through 12 and covers our 18 to 22 program, as well as any out-of-district supports. And that is a lot of grades to cover. And we're finding that oftentimes I'm deploying staff from the Elmwood School to support students at the Hopkins School when the Hopkins BCBA is servicing in the middle school and the high school when needed. So in order to stabilize that situation, I am requesting a 1.0. The way I envision utilizing this position is to station this particular person at the Hopkins School. So each elementary school will have a 1.0 BCBA, and what that would do is free up the existing BCBA to go at the secondary level and to provide primary support at the middle school with additional support as needed at the high school. So if that request can be supported, that will definitely stabilize our situation that we're handling right now. I'm also asking for a point for occupational therapist district-wide. So we have occupational therapists at each level, but similar to the BCBA situation, we have one occupational therapist who is servicing in grades 4 through 12 and up into the 18 to 22 program. So it's the same scenario. So in order to stabilize that coverage with this 0.4 increase, I would be able to provide an additional person in support, so that way that person can provide the support needed at Hopkins in middle school, and then we can further service high school in 18 to 22 with that additional level of support. So I'm also asking for 0.2 clerical support. This would slightly increase the hours of the Hopkins secretarial support as well as the middle school secretarial support. With the continuing needs in the department in terms of record keeping and meeting regulatory timelines, this additional increase would level the playing field among all the clerical support in the special education department. In my expense summary, I talk about the increase of $42,019, and I wrote here that the significant increases are in transportation, contracted services, and in tuition, and the remaining accounts have been level funded. I did add supplies down here, so although supplies is not a significant increase, I do feel it's important to talk about tonight because I had a conversation at Hvac and with Jen Helder, our Hvac coordinator, about making a shift in some of our funding. So right now we want to put money in food and supplies and events of $3,000 and then just decrease our workshop line item by $1,000. What we're hoping to do is, and of course dependent on the pandemic and our ability to have events, but we're hoping to continue to have community connections and involvement in events, and we'd like to use the funding more so in that arena to continue to make some nice connections with families. And then the workshops, we're finding many of them can be grant funded and some of them are free, so we don't need as much funding in that line. So although this is not a significant increase as I stated up here, I just did want to speak about it so folks understand what we're doing with Hvac and what our goal and hope is in the community. Transportation is an increase of $26,000. Through 74, and this reflects both assessment fees and the addition of a specialized transport nurse attendant. So when you see up here the ask for the 1.2 nurse district-wide, that's an adjustment. Part of that nursing position is servicing a student who needs nursing services on the van. So we've broken it up that way as transportation attendant, and so that's what some of this figure entails. In contracted services, I am asking for an increase of $20,000 to address the potential need for services for students with high needs due to COVID. So right now, students have great needs. We've been fortunate enough to have some grant funding from the Department of Education. Moving forward, we cannot solely depend on the current compensatory grant funding. However, what I am excited to report is that the Department of Education is starting to disperse more grants to special education specific outside of COVID-specific funding that I know has been allocated to both the town and the school. This $20,000 I'm hoping to preserve for students with high needs who, post-pandemic and into next year, might need additional supports. And for each student, it might look differently. For some, it might be related services. For some, it may be tutoring. But I wanted to reserve funds in the budget for that purpose. And then above and beyond that, the grant funding that we're receiving from the Department of Education, we are able to use some of it for that as well. And so if we have students outside the high needs category that might need additional services and supports post-COVID, I will be allocating those funds as well. For instance, I just got an email tonight from the Department of Education. They have notified us that the 274 grant, which previously has been expired, we haven't had that grant in about 3 years at least, has been brought back in light of the circumstance, and Hopkinton has an opportunity to apply for $18,000, and we are able to use it for COVID for this purpose that I'm speaking of tonight. So I will be writing that grant. So between the budgeted amount and grant funding amount, which we're being told will continue as we enter next year, I'm hopeful that we're going to have the funding to support student needs as we move forward, and we're addressing some of the gaps. And then as far as tuition goes, there's an increase in out-of-district tuitions of $10,000 to $66,000. This is supporting students in current placements and anticipated student placements and needs. Overall tuitions have decreased, which has allowed for a $300,000 reduction in the use of circuit breaker from $600,000 in FY21. We're doing a very good job of supporting students in the current placements that they're in, meeting all of the students' needs both in and out of district. So I feel very positive about this number and how the students are being serviced, like I said, both in and out of district. So I'm happy to answer questions.
I'm going to just start with the community question that we had, and then we can break up. We did get an email from a community member, and I'll just read it to you so you can maybe respond.
Sure.
She said, this is a request on behalf of LGBT kids of the Hopkinton Middle School and High School. The kids speak of the need for, and they deserve, a designated therapist or counselor for school traumatic events, or even just going through gender dysphoria, and trans youth are regularly for trans youth, it's regularly happening to them during school hours at both the high school and the middle school. Puberty is partly painful for trans youth. They deserve a professional to talk to if anxiety gets too severe. The kids openly speak about this, and they know this to be a real problem. And it goes on, but that's basically the gist, is what kinds of supports, or are there any supports that you're looking at to bolster the needs for this community, and especially in the secondary level?
Oh, sure. Thank you for asking the question, and I appreciate that. So at the secondary level, we have both guidance and adjustment support at the buildings, and I would say that the clinicians that we're working with are very well versed and trained in their field to address both this domain and other student mental health and needs. That being said, what they do is they're versed in the CASEL curriculum. So the CASEL is a curriculum from the Department of Education, and the 5 core competencies of that curriculum, which include things like self-regulation, self-awareness, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, those core areas would address the very needs of a student who's struggling in that arena, as well as other students. In addition, there's a national framework, the Mass model, that they utilize, and that is a very data-driven model, and that is how they make responsible decisions around student needs, both individually and programmatically. So I would say for students who have this specific need, I feel confident that our counseling staff, both at the middle and high school, have the skill set and the training to address that need. Above and beyond that, if a clinician, let's say, had a very difficult situation where they were concerned about how to address a particular area, maybe with new research, we have, on a monthly basis, we have clinical roundtable meetings. I have appointed a psychiatrist, Dr. Hvac, who works with both middle and high school. This is her second year working with us, and she does monthly clinical supervision. And so what we would do if we had a circumstance where we need a little more professional development is we would reach out certainly to her to help our team with any particular area that a student might have. And quite frankly, it's to address many areas around mental health, substance abuse. We would look at the LGBT category, as well as a range of other areas that students might have a need in. Right now, we are working with her to look at building a 3-tiered system of mental health support for the district, and we're looking at that for grades 6 through 12. And how that came about, I'm sitting on the HOP board in Hopkinton, which is, we look at substance abuse prevention and intervention, and Ms. Fagiano is on that board with me. I've been on that board for several years now, and I've worked with this board to build a 3-tiered system of support for substance abuse at the secondary level. And what we determined at the end of last year in our work with this group is that it would really be good internally to do the same thing with mental health. So we're looking at taking the similar type of model and working with Dr. Hvac to build that. And I would suspect, and my hope is, that through this work, we would be able to address that need. And so, in short, we have educated capacity to address it, as well as professional development to support it.
Great. What other questions do we have for Dr. Zaleski?
You can go first.
I don't have any questions. I think what you're asking for is very reasonable. If I were you, I would ask for more, of course. But I also just want to express my immense gratitude from the community for ensuring that all of our IEP kids have the possibility to go in 5 days a week. During this really intense and traumatic time, I think we're so lucky. And the services have been fantastic, even with all the stress that teachers and specialists are feeling. I think we're just really lucky to have such a supportive administration for our kids, so
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. One, on the requested staff.
Yes.
Did you show, or do you have an easy way to talk about the total staff that you have at each school? And, budget-wise, it was like a 3% increase from last year, but
Sure, I can show you.
we're adding 1 or 2. How many already exist at each school?
So I can show you, this is the Form 2 that I utilize.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make it bigger. I don't know if we can.
I think you do command and
And then
also.
while you're doing it, I'll ask the second question. It's kind of related. Is .5 really enough at Marathon? I mean, I have recent experience and feedback from at Marathon, and it seemed there were very frequent use of substitutes to take special education duties. And it seemed like there was a lot of work there, and I'm wondering if that's really enough.
So I do feel like it's enough. I think that there's a substitute situation, and we're in a particular year when we're having
This was last year.
Oh, last year. Okay, all right. So I would say in meeting with the teams, I do the budget process. I meet with both the principal leadership team as well as the staff, the team chair staff who work with the learning specialists. And in analyzing the caseload of students that we have and what we need, I do feel confident. This .5 increase is for the intensive special need, and that is really where our greatest need is. Not that there's not a great need. To Ms. Tyler's point, we could always ask for more in every area, but in developing this fiscally responsible budget to meet student needs and making sure we have covered every single area, I do feel like with this we would be in pretty good shape. I feel like without it, we'd have a little bit of a dilemma, because having that many intensive students at the Marathon School with only 1.5 is already challenging. It just is. So when looking at, you would ask what we have for the learning specialists currently, So this is what we have with the learning specialists. And then it shows you the proposed.
Okay.
Okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we see we've leveled it, but in the intensive area, this is where we're increasing it. Does that make sense?
Looks like they're all the same, but...
Yeah, we're increasing right here. This is the intensive
Okay.
teaching staff. That's where the increase lies. With the learning specialists, we're leveling it across the district. So the learning specialists themselves are leveled. And then when you get down to the related, with the nurses, this is the 1.2 ask. That's the increase. And then when we get down here, this is the increase to the therapists.
Okay.
And then the BCBA increase ask.
Okay.
So that's how we do the comparison. We look at what we have. And just to let you know, in terms of the data that leads up to this document, each member of my staff submits a caseload document to me. And I analyze that caseload document with them. I meet monthly with OT, PT, speech psychologists, as well as BCBAs, and the team chairs we meet weekly.
Yeah.
And during the course of those discussions, we do a deep dive. I hear directly from them as providers. I trust what they tell me. They do a fantastic job of analyzing student needs. We don't guess. And they go through their caseloads with me. We talk about the number of staff and the allocation. We look at the IEP service delivery. We discuss gaps. And this is how we come up with this. And that's how we came up with the occupational therapy ask, as well as the BCBA ask. And then, of course, certainly principals give their input, and then they tell me where the greatest need is, and they have supported this ask as well. Okay?
Yeah, I'll just conclude with it. In my opinion, the special needs specialists have some of the most hands-on jobs in the district. They might be always on, all day.
Yes.
And they also have to, in that interaction, some of the most sensitive, nuanced communication is necessary to be called on throughout the day. So I just want to thank you and the team for everything you do.
Thank you.
And I hope that that they understand how valued they are by the district.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, and I'll certainly give that feedback for anyone who doesn't see this presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Nancy, did you think?
A couple things. One is just as a whole, you have done a great job in bringing in grant funding and getting things that would be difficult for us to fund otherwise, and I always want to highlight that because our budget is never easy, and I think this year in particular. And so impressed with what you're able to deliver right now in the midst of this for some of our kids who have the highest needs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I also want to say, and I appreciate all the gratitude here tonight, I'm so grateful for the team. I can't say enough for my team. Truthfully, the team chairs have worked tireless with me. Mr. Dan Mazur, in building the ESY program, was invaluable to me. We worked daily since the pandemic hit to make that happen. And all the providers, the teachers, the learning specialists, the related service providers, I mean, these folks work tirelessly on a daily basis, collaborating, outreaching me, working with administration. We all realize that, we're in a difficult situation, and we're all trying to just be as supportive as possible to one another. So I just don't want it to go unnoticed that the team, I couldn't do it without the team. And so I just wanted to say that.
Excellent.
Thank you.
And I echo what my colleagues have already said. They've said it more eloquently than I could, but I think, obviously, you do fabulous work. I also want to thank you for putting in, I think it's the 20,000 or so, to cover anticipated gaps in our high-needs students from this very learning environment that we're going through right now. I think that's going to be so important, and I'm really glad to see that there. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
If we don't have any more questions, I think that's good. Thank you so much, Dr. Zaleski.
Thank you.
It's so nice to see you back.
Nice to see you folks as well. And have a happy holiday.
You too.
You too.
Thank you.
Okay. Our next budget is with Mr. Ghosh, the technology budget. Welcome.
One moment, Mr. Bush.
Oh.
Want to see?
COVID protocols in action right here.
Right. Get this on film, folks. This is what we do on a daily basis. Thank you, Dr. Kavanaugh, and everybody for supporting us with this.
Done like a pro.
So clean.
Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Good day. I'd just like to, start by kind of echoing what Dr. Zaleski said in terms of just thanking my team and personally, publicly. We have a team of dedicated individuals that have really kind of helped guide the community through the last 6 months, which has been pretty trying for everybody. So I just want to give a shout out to that team. Linda Henderson, who does all of our scheduling and does a lot of our communications. Lisa Carty, who does a lot of our account management. Randy Gustafson, who manages over 5,000 devices and makes sure they're ready for all of our staff and students on a day-to-day basis. And our tech integrators that have been coaching our staff for the last 6 months through this pandemic. So without them, we really wouldn't be educating our kids. And a lot of times I think they are unnoticed a little bit, so I think I wanted to give a shout out to them for their work. So thank you. My budget overview and my executive summary, I thought I'd share quickly the summary up front, and then I have a little bit of a presentation that I would like to share with you. I've got my 15-minute limit, just to give you a little bit of an update of where we've kind of been the last 8 years, a little bit quickly, and then talk about some of the expense accounts that we have and some of the increases for the budget for this year. And I'd be happy to take some questions.
That's great.
That sounds like a plan. So the estimated increase for the technology budget this year is around $274,000, which is equivalent to about 13%. In short, that looks at an FTE, one full FTE. We'll get to that in a second. Some increase in software costs, one new Chromebook lease at the middle school. And so that's really the bulk of it. And we'll talk about some of those details in a minute. But typically the technology budget funds three key areas. The first is really maintaining all of our operating systems and our infrastructure. And this current budget covers all of the repairs for all of our hardware, all of our network systems, meaning our wireless systems in the building, and all of our wired systems in the building, making sure they're working on a day-to-day basis. The increase for FY22 is due to some support still in some remote instruction and renewals on laptops for the high school teachers, and then some additional Chromebooks for all of the middle school students. The largest increase in FY22 will be our high school instructional technology account, and this increase will be to support a new teacher lease for the high school teachers this year. And that would be the beginning of a new 3-year lease, which lasts a 4-year period. So typically, all of our teacher leases, we have 3 main leases, one for the elementary teachers, one for the middle school teachers, and one lease for the high school teachers. And we cycle through those every 4 years. So we pay for a lease for 3 years, they're off for 1 year, and then we start over again the following year. And we've been on that cycle for a number of years now. The next key area is looking really at staffing, as I mentioned. So I'm asking for 1 FTE this year. That would be split between 2 roles, really a half-time account management type person, someone to really help us with all of the accounts that we manage on a day-to-day basis. This would be student accounts. This would be parent accounts like PowerSchool. This would be resetting passwords, all of that kind of stuff. And then the other half would be for a webmaster position, which would go to update all of the content on our website, from the school committee page to pictures to things like, school improvement plans on each individual school site, and on in terms of the number of areas on the website that need to be updated on a regular basis. If we look back at last year, and just over the last 6 months, my team in particular just has not had enough time to spend on a day-to-day basis updating the pages as we should be. And so this ask, this 1.0 FTE would support those 2 positions moving forward. the last key area is really instructional technology, which provides teachers and students access to digital resources, tools, which obviously helps with differentiating instruction and really helps to improve engagement in the classroom and more recently, remotely. The presented budget will continue to maintain core equipment in the classroom. We try to maintain a standard, which is usually an LCD projector in each classroom, a document camera, and then a laptop for each of our staff members. And then we work to make sure each student has a digital device to access curriculum. And beyond that, FY22, there's a need for additional software licenses, really, just to support remote instruction, digital instruction, and just a lot of subjects that are just adding more and more digital content each year as kind of books fade in and out. There's always an additional curriculum set that's being added to our budget. So I'm just going to switch over a little bit to kind of where we've come over the last couple of years, because I think as school committee members change, and I'd just like to take a couple minutes just to kind of update some of the things that we've done over the last couple of years and give you a little bit of direction of where we're going. So really the last 8 years I've been in this role now, I think for about that time, and when I first started, we had no dedicated wireless network systems throughout the district. The high school had the first wireless network system, and it was spotty every day. There was problems with connectivity every day. That was the environment we were living in 8 years ago. No dedicated fiber connection, no dedicated servers, no dedicated fiber coming into the building to give us high-speed access. We didn't have people to do data analysis. We didn't have tech integration people to help coach staff. We had no one-to-one laptop programs. We had no security systems in terms of what we have now in terms of cameras and control access doors. No digital evaluation system, no digital workflows for HR, no data privacy contracts beyond the big vendors that we worked with. So the last couple of years we've been pretty busy putting a lot of those things in place, bringing the district kind of into the 21st century, trying to improve workflows, trying to improve digital access for our staff and for our community. And so over those last 8 years, we put a lot of those things in place by creating one-to-one environments. Right now, actually preschool through grade 12, we are one-to-one with digital devices. That is something we've worked on for the last 8 years and have met that, just this past summer. We've been awarded a Google District Reference School in the past couple of years. We now have high-speed digital Wi-Fi access in all of our classrooms, and we have, some staff to help us with data management. And just put a number of our devices on leases. Before I took on this position, we, would buy large purchases when we had money through capital. 8 years ago, we had, some devices in the library, and then we had some lab models going on where we did a one-time purchase, but there was no plan to kind of replace those devices once they expired and were no longer useful. So the big priority was to come in and put equipment on leases to kind of keep our budget level, so we didn't have any large spikes from year to year. And so that's what we spent a lot of the time doing in the last 8 years. Many of you know we migrated to PowerSchool. We've added layers to PowerSchool over the years, from digital registration for parents, online registration for parents, digital updating from parents. We've improved our communication systems by going to school messenger, which is allowing us to communicate with parents at various levels, from the classroom level all the way up to a district level, via text, via phone, via email, on a consistent basis. And that's all tied in through PowerSchool, which helps us kind of manage these systems a little easier. I think the thing to think about with our staff is that every year, I think the community needs to understand that our staff grows in terms of our teaching staff, our support staff, but our technology staff tends to stay small year to year. So we have more accounts every year, more devices to manage every year, more staff to set up every year, but our staff has stayed the same. And so that's why this year we're asking for another FTE to support the work we're doing. just to give you an overview of the equipment goals, I kind of touched on this at the beginning, but this looks at ratios of student devices. Like I said, we're 1-to-1 at each of the buildings. You'll see roughly the student count under the student device column, 1,200 kids, for example, at the high school. We're 1-to-1 with devices there. Every classroom has an interactive projector, non-interactive at the high school level, interactive at the elementary level. You can see the lease cycles. So this year, year 4 is for the high school. That means they're up for a new lease this year. And then you can see the elementary schools are on year 1 of their new lease, and the middle school is finishing year 3 of their computer lease. And so all those 1-to-1 goals have kind of met. There's been some kind of questions about, how many leases we have. That gives you at least a rough overview of the staff leases that we have. So there's 3 staff leases. Beyond that, we have one older iPad lease for the elementary schools. That's roughly $14,000. That will be finished next year. We have one other additional Chromebook lease that we started this past year for Hopkins and Elmwood. And then we're asking for a new lease for the middle school this year. So really for Chromebooks, when we look at how many leases do we have to manage all of the Chromebooks in the districts, it's just 2 leases. An older one we started last year, and then the newer middle school lease that we were asking for this year. So that kind of covers some of the leases that we have. In terms of the district priorities moving forward, we're working to align K-12 curriculum with the new mass technology standards. We've done a lot of work in the last 2 years to improve our data privacy. Like I said, 8 years ago, we had a few vendors with data contracts, but all the other freemium type software that teachers were using or experimenting with, we didn't necessarily have data privacy contracts in place with those vendors. Currently, we now have all of our companies that we work with have contracts besides the 5 or 6 that we seek parent permission for through the PowerSchool registration process. So beyond that, everything else has a covered data privacy policy. We've worked with the Tech Collaborative now to create a national DPA agreement so that more and more vendors can sign on, and that's come a long way in the last 2 years. In terms of maintenance, we've kind of covered this a little bit, but it's to maintain the equipment we have. Do we have a lot of big new initiatives coming in the next year? No, we're trying to just maintain now the equipment that we have and really focus more on instruction and coaching teachers and preparing them in the classroom. And hopefully the work that we've done in the last 8 years has put that infrastructure into place so that we don't have to worry about the Wi-Fi every day and we can focus on the classroom. In terms of the network infrastructure and security, Chapin is our network administrator. He manages all of that. Moving forward, we would like to conduct an audit, as soon as the summer is one of the initiatives to kind of have a third-party group look at our current structures to see if there's any weaknesses or areas for improvement. In addition, we've worked in the last year with the town through a grant, I believe, Susan, correct me if I'm wrong, to do some key security training for key administrators and staff in the district. We've been working at that for at least a year now. In addition to that, Chapin's worked to purchase some additional software to help test all of our staff, to train them on phishing schemes and things of that nature. So we've been randomly sending out messages, so don't be surprised if you see something from us in one of your work emails that's testing to see if you shouldn't be clicking on things. So we're dipsticking with teachers to kind of train them to how to recognize a URL to improve safety, because in the end, really, when we talk about security and safety, it's really the end users. The biggest liability is the end users, and making sure that we're training them so that they're not clicking on things they shouldn't be. So we've started that work. We're going to continue that with the audit and upgrading some of our firewall structures this year with some capital funds, but we've made some progress in the last 8 years for sure. And this really gets more into the details. So we've talked, I think, about the personnel summary. Happy to answer questions about that. In terms of the expense summary, if we look at some of the big increases, the tech contracted services, which is where a lot of the district software sits, we have about an increase this year amount of account of $100,000. That can be shared really over 3 main sources: Zoom, Schoology, and Panopto. Zoom is obviously what we've been using for remote instructions and meetings. Schoology is our new LMS for Hopkins up through the high school. Panopto is our new video management system to migrate more of our video content off of YouTube to kind of help protect our younger elementary kids who are being distracted from some of the distractions in YouTube. So we are growing Panopto and our digital content through that system. So those three systems have increased some of the contracted services accounts. Our maintenance count hasn't changed. It's been level, I think, for the last 3 years at 75,000. That helps us fix anything broken. Our AV account is up slightly. That's due to Marathon. We'd like to have one spare projector so that if one goes out on a warranty repair, we can swap one in and keep the classroom running. So not a major increase there. Instructional technology is up roughly $136,000. And this is mostly for the laptop refresh at the high school, as I mentioned. And then it will cover some of the Chromebook lease at the middle school. The last account, instructional software, is up roughly $27,000. And some of that is mixed. Some of it is really instructional technology. It could be a simple math program. It could be something like Cami, where we're allowed to distribute assignments digitally, and students can write on those PDFs digitally and submit that work back to a teacher. So things like Cami, things like Kuta Math, there's a variety of products we've added to help with our digital instruction, spread across multiple accounts, and that totals roughly $27,000. A small increase in the library account for Pebble Go, which we've updated, and our professional development account is level funded, and it's been pretty consistent over the last 3 years. It's around 20,000, it's in the details, which covers really professional development for the district, technical staff, teaching staff across the board. I think that is it in terms of the increases. So I'm happy to entertain questions from the committee or the community.
I want to thank you for taking the time to brief us on this. This is so important, and I think technology is one of those sometimes thankless areas where everybody expects it, where to be at their fingertips, ready to go with great response time and reliability, but nobody really thinks about what it takes to make that happen. So I think taking the time to go through this was really valuable for us and for the community. You answered all my questions, I think, in your presentation, but again, we went from March to today, really got here because technology enabled us to do that. And without your department and your staff and the work that they've done and the investments you've made, we couldn't be doing our Zoom classes. We couldn't be doing any of this. We wouldn't have been positioned starting 8 years ago with devices for our students. And obviously, we've heard of many districts who are not as fortunate as we are, who have struggled because they haven't had these ongoing investments. So I really am very appreciative of all this work.
Thank you.
And hope you pass that on to the staff as well.
We are lucky. I mean, not to say we haven't had any blips in the road, right? We've definitely had an outage that, the community is aware of with Comcast, and we've rectified that, but it's not because of issues with our current hardware. We did have a bad, battery backup that we've replaced since then. So we've worked through those kinks, but the system should work. Everyone remembers the one day you're down, not the 8 years you're out, so that's what I say.
The two questions that I had, I do have two quick ones.
Sure.
The audit you mentioned, did you budget for that, or is that something that you can fund?
That's in the capital, the security budget.
Okay.
Yep. Not in the revolving account. There's not beside the network system account covers some maintenance, for example, on the software side of our firewalls, for example. Or we have some licensing, for example, on sensors that monitor some of our core switches, for example. Temperature is one out, that kind of stuff. So that gets renewed through this budget.
Okay.
But in talking with some of the final security work that we're doing, we have some final security work at the middle school with some cameras and updates. We were able to leverage some of that money to run the audit on the security of the network.
That's great. That's great. And my only other question was, and I'm not sure, actually, this is for you and Ms. Parson, who's not here tonight, but have you heard many requests, or would this maybe not be you, for any technology that might help next year with differentiating our learning or helping with students who come in from different places, having spent time either remote or hybrid or in private school or homeschool, or have there been any new sort of educational software requests that you've had to fund yet?
We've funded some additional requests this year to help with that, and so, but on top of that, we have existing software that does some of that work, right? So there's the diagnostic side, for example, where we simply have a tool, like whether it's Star Math or whether it's a tool like Hvac, where you have a student coming in, you can quickly diagnose them to see where their reading level is, where their math level is. And then things like Hvac will even go so far to say, okay, well, here are some of the standards you're weak in. We want you to focus on these standards. Here's some content that you need to spend more time on. So between the combination of the diagnostic software tools that we have and the support, curricular tools that we have, you can kind of get some of that targeted support. So I think across a lot of the areas, whether it's digital simulations through little things like gizmos where students do more hands-on things to actually see science happening, or whether it's actual just hardware where you may have a visually impaired student that needs an extra large screen or something to just access the content. Part of the network system account, for example, allows for some of that technology to be bought for kids that have that need.
Thank you. Joe?
I have a few questions. First, I want to disagree with Amanda, though. She said that IT functions like yours are sometimes a thankless job. I think they're always a thankless job, sometimes. So thank you.
It usually starts with I'm so frustrated and then a thank you. I had an email like that this morning. I'm not prepared. This is so frustrating. And
So I'll say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you up front, and then I'll critique your presentation, so.
Okay.
All right. So, didn't we consolidate on Schoology this year? Didn't we get rid of some other applications and consolidate, or were there savings?
There was not savings moving to Schoology. We had, I stand corrected. So moving forward into next year, there will be some savings from Canvas. So this year in the transition, we kept Canvas in tandem so that teachers could move content over the year. But that will fall off next year, and Schoology will stay put. So there will be roughly a $10,000 savings from Canvas next year. However, at the middle school, there is no cost for Google Classroom, for example. So Google Classroom is a free tool, so there's no savings from moving the middle school off of that, for example.
Okay. And then on the website, you're asking for 0.5 FTE. We have a website now, and you have a staff now, and I know it's hard to get around to it, but have you considered or tried other ways to kind of allocate the work on the team? It's a big ask, a 13% increase. It's a large percentage increase. I'm trying to find ways to not ask for a 13% increase.
Sure, no, that's a
And is there a way to experiment with dividing that work up differently or allocating it differently on the team?
I would say we've tried that, I guess, over the last several years, and it's helped, but it's not perfect enough. So as of right now, it is allocated, meaning, for example, the homepage at each school is kind of basically updated by, a secretarial staff at each school.
Okay.
So there is that division. Ideally, the directors are contributing to their pages and updating those. So there is some division of labor. I'm doing a little bit of it. Linda, when she has time, will do some of that. So we tried to do that and split those tasks over those people. And we've done that for several years. But even before we did the migration, last year, there was just tons of files and things that just don't get updated all the time that we miss out on, and so that concerns me. And so I think even when we look at the amount of work that each of those staff already have, asking them to do the website just seems like that one more thing that's just about to put every staff member over the edge. So we've provided training for some of those staff. We've asked them to do some of the basic things to keep us going. But you see that they just they don't have time to get to it. The athletic website is not updated. There's no schedules that are inputted to the sites, and parents kind of depend on some of that information to kind of navigate that world, and they just haven't had the time to get to those issues. So I guess we have tried that, and my concern is it just hasn't worked that effectively. We can kind of continue to revisit that, and I guess it also depends on what the expectations are for the community. And, I think the community, as you're well aware, have high expectations for response to information, and so we're just trying to keep up with that.
Yeah. The next question is more on I guess vision, infrastructure vision. You mentioned 8 years ago there was no central data center. What's our model today? I mean, I would look at Power School and Schoology as kind of SaaS platforms or a cloud infrastructure kind of thing, but do we also have an on-premise data center? And what's your vision looking ahead 5 years? Are we looking at less on-premise data center, more infrastructure as a service, or?
Yeah, so I think we've kind of have a balance, right? So Power School is hosted, obviously Schoology is hosted, and then certain things we keep on-premise, like basic things like print manager servers, our diagnostics tools sit on there, our security systems like our Genetech and Linnell platforms all sit on those servers. So we've tried to find a balance where we have those core systems in-house, and that seems to be cost-effective, and then mixing up some of our really important student information systems and platforms that are hosted to kind of make sure that we have close to 100% uptime as possible. Is there potential to move the existing things to the cloud? Potentially. I think we'd have to kind of run a cost analysis and see how much money we could actually save, because to be honest, some of the cloud services just aren't that cheap when you look at it. So I think we'd have to look at each server, figure out how much it would cost to kind of put those in the cloud, and figure out if that's really cheaper than hosting them in-house. So we do have to do some work in that area. I don't have all the answers in terms of what that would cost yet, but we've had that question come up, and I know Chapin and Network Admin is going to work on getting some numbers so we can start to make decisions about that.
All right, I'm glad you're thinking about it anyway.
Yeah,
It's
no.
sometimes useful just to go out and see what the cost comparison is, and then...
No, I think that's a good thing that we need to look at, but I don't have an exact cost.
And then another big expense chunk seemed to be the high school laptop refresh. Is that can you describe that more? Do we own the teacher laptops, or we lease those, or what's the most cost-effective way to do that?
So those are essentially lease to own. So we will purchase them and pay for them basically over 3 years. So it's a lease to own program. So three payments. At the end of those 3 payments, we own the devices.
Was it an increase in the year we're looking at of $100,000 that would hit this year? Or is that going to be divided over 3 years?
That's the overall, that's a 3-year lease, so that the increase would be over 3 years. So we pay for that 3 years, and then it falls off.
So you're saying that's an increase over the amount we're paying for the lease of the laptops that they currently have?
So for the current high school staff, they're currently in year 4 now. This is the end of year 4. So in year 4, we don't pay for a lease. The devices are owned. And at that point, we usually kind of try to sell off the laptops if we can, take some of that money and kind of put it back into the lease. Or in years past, when we haven't had that option, we've trickled them down to other staff. So for example, this year for the elementary machines, the goal was to sell those back and help offset some of the costs of our lease, but we ended up needing those devices to support all the paras in the district so they could do the work they did. So we had about 100 devices we were going to sell and then use that money, but had to reuse those devices. And so paras needed devices to support kids, substitute teachers needed devices to support classrooms, and we didn't have enough devices for those kids, so those devices went to that group. So in years past, we've done that. We've basically put them into the student loaner program, we've made them spare loaner devices, and we've kept them until they've died. So in this particular year, the hope is to sell them to offset the cost. So, if we're looking at roughly 120 devices at the high school, it's possible we might be able to sell those for $20,000 and offset some of the costs, which would reduce that cost. But I don't want to speak until we know that's a possibility, because I tried to do that this year, and pandemic, changed things on us.
Okay. That's all I had. Thank you.
Good questions. Thank you. Anything, Nancy?
Sure, do you want me? Yeah. So, it will come as no surprise to any of you that this is not the first time I have been called upon to eat my words. During the last two budget seasons, I have given Mr. Bush a hard time. Why, out of my arrogance or my ignorance or my overly officious need to count pennies, I have questioned the need for one-to-one iPads and laptops and Chromebooks. Then COVID happened, right? So you've proven me wrong. But I want to say that, amid this crisis where weaknesses in our characters, in our institutions, in the fabric of our lives show themselves so readily, I have seen no weaknesses from you and your team. I have only seen strengths. And I have been so surprised by the agility with which you've responded to this crisis. It's really grace under pressure. And I know that's an overused phrase, and I apologize for it. And if I'm not mistaken, the last 2 years you've come in and you have very clearly delineated your budgetary needs, and several months later we found that you did not get what you asked for. It's been reduced. And you continue to work in an amazingly quiet and efficient way with a shoestring budget and a skeleton staff. I apologize for the doubling of metaphors. And you have done an amazing job, and I really, really hope this year that the budget fairy gives you everything you ask for.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I don't want to spend extra money, but, it's a growing community with a lot of technical needs. And so we have been fortunate, Other districts have not been as fortunate, and are still waiting for devices to show up.
That's right.
We're switching gears and trying to improve instruction at a high level, and some people are still waiting for the devices to show up.
But thank you for everything, truly.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
So, as you were in the last discussion, I'm left being last where most of the most salient things have already been said. Your department really has carried the district in some pretty crazy times, both with devices, supportive devices, back to making sure that kids were able to access the internet at home, all the way back in the spring, which seems like 10 years ago. But also looking at your presentation, I was struck by, what seemed like kind of slow build-up to get to this one-to-one point. It could not have possibly been more timely to be there now. One question I had is, just looking back last year, the request for the webmaster, my recollection was it was a full-time position, and now you're looking at a half. Is that right?
I'm trying to be reasonable. I originally had 2 FTEs, and it was reduced to 1 before I got here tonight.
I don't think you ever asked for anything unreasonable. I think the budget played out the way it did last year. But did want to highlight that, so thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for me.
I think that's it for the group. Thank you so much
Thank you, I
for
appreciate
taking the time. We went a little bit over, but I think we don't see you all that often, and it's you're such a critical piece of the foundation that we wanted to take the time.
Yes.
So really appreciate it.
I do want to say thank you to your people, because honestly, Ashok, they're like invisible people until you need them, and then they're so efficient, they're right there to help you all the time. They do an amazing job. Thank
I'll
you.
let them know.
Yes.
Thank you.
Please do it.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thanks, you too. And I think, Ms. Ramick, I think you were going to cover the buildings and grounds budget tonight.
I am.
Well, thank you.
Grab the screen. So unfortunately, Mr. Person was not able to be here this evening to present his budget, which
is a shame because truly he has been kind of the man behind the magic that has allowed these buildings to open. You know, and you talk about kind of the invisible staff, but his staff has done amazing things around these campuses to keep us open and keep us running. So, shout out to Mr. Person, and sorry he couldn't be here this evening. So, presenting the Building and Grounds Department, just as a reminder to everyone in terms of the size of what you're looking at for a district campus. You have over 120 acres of land and 636,000 square feet of building, and that is maintained by this department. So the budget that is before you now is an increase of 9.2%, and that is before the personnel that have been requested. So the increase that you see in the report, the 3.6, those are just strictly contractual raises. And then I'll get into the personnel summary in a minute. And then the second piece is the increase in expenses, which is 13.4%. Yes, 13.4%. So that makes up a full budget increase for this department of 9.2%. So the personnel request is a 1.0 new custodial position and a 0.5 secretarial position. You'll see, and if you remember from previous years, it is these administrative support positions that are eliminated almost systematically. The secretarial position for the Building and Grounds really does a lot with handling all of the invoices, and as you can imagine with the capital projects and the building projects, this position has gotten very busy. We are not renting out the buildings right now, but the increase in the action just around that position. There's currently a 0.5, and this proposal would bring that person to 1.0. The 1.0 custodial position would be for the Elmwood and Hopkins. It would be a night position. Currently, there is a 1.5 night position at both Elmwood and Hopkins, so one person is actually a split shift. This would bring it up to 2.0 at both buildings. As you can imagine, the person that has a split shift, there's times, obviously, where there's just a single person in each of those buildings when the person's at the other building. So there's a lot of square footage that needs to be covered, and this would give them 2.0 at night, which would be more in line with what the other buildings have. The expense summary, an increase of $265,000. What is in here is $187,000 of estimated PPE for next year. No matter what learning model we are in, and no matter whether or not there are vaccines, chances are PPE is not going away for a while. So this is an estimate based on our burn rate, if you will, that we've seen for this year of what we would need for next year. The other piece that is missing is because we have not had any building use rentals, obviously we shut down the buildings in March, we will have no rental revenue for all of this year and potentially into next year as well. So we offset the budget for Building and Grounds by using some of that revenue. So that revenue has been taken out, and so of course that makes the increase look higher. What we have been able to do is take a look at our utilities. The Marathon utility in particular is one that if you look at the experience over the years, we have not had a normal year since the building has been open. And even this year will not be normal for any of the buildings due to running our HVAC at 100%. But we do feel comfortable in reducing some of those utility lines, looking at past experience. So that has moved this budget in a good direction. There's an increase in the contracted service. One of the programs that we started this year that was new to the budget was preventive maintenance by an outside contractor for Hvac. When the actual estimate came in, it was higher than what we had originally budgeted. So this is truing it up as to what that outside vendor will do, which again is in tandem with what our maintenance people will do. So the two marry up in getting a complete service of our HVAC program. The other piece that we're looking at is wastewater maintenance. This is at both the Hopkins School and the high school, and this is a new preventive maintenance, and it's really just taking care of the sewer pits. There's really no flashy way of putting it. So this is something that is a service similar to everybody having their septic pumped. It's something that needs to be done here on an annual basis for the sewer pits. And they're only at the Hopkins and the high school. That's how the system here works. And lastly, what we talked about was the custodial supplies, which is the PPE. Extraordinary maintenance, for the most part, it really is level funded. The projects have shifted a little bit, but what we're doing within each building, of course, is based on need. And this will change on an annual basis, but the line in total is level funded. And lastly, the revolving accounts, this just gets back into the fact that we will not be using any building use offset. We do still use the parking lot revolving, a $15,000 offset to the building and grounds. We will still be able to maintain that revenue offset. And that's it for this program. If there's any questions?
Well, I am sorry that Mr. Person isn't here. You did a wonderful job. But you know,
I'm not Mr. Person, though.
He and his team, I mean, it's another team of incredible unsung heroes. I mean, really, all summer, they were here, all spring and all summer, they were here moving furniture, and, I mean, you know, all that sort of one-off stuff, but so valuable to us, I think, is the attention to detail on a regular basis that enabled us to go through this period and, you know, maintain operations. It's the attention to the HVAC every year, not just this year. And I think, you know, bringing in, now we have the outside service to help. I think it was going to be every other service would be done by the outside provider, which is a really reasonable way to tap that expertise, but manage cost. And it's that continually looking at ongoing maintenance in a responsible way to the taxpayer and the students and the schools. It's just invaluable. And I think the work that they have done has just put us in a very, very good place. And I'm so, so thankful. That said, I don't have a lot of questions, except I was actually curious. This is just looking for ways to cut costs. I mean, I'm fully understanding of the need for more clerical support, and every year, to Meg's point about IT, like every year we cut these positions, and yet the district balloons, balloon with students and more staff. Are there any aspects of that job that can be better automated? Is there any, maybe move to more self-service if it's like facility rental, or have we looked at any ways to maybe automate, invest in technology to help make that job more efficient from the clerical perspective?
In terms of the building and grounds, it is actually very automated.
Okay.
It has a work order system. The preventive maintenance programs are in there, and so the work orders open up based on a calendar schedule. In terms of the accounting, you have your purchase orders, and then you pay your invoices based off of the purchase orders. Our facility use, it is an online portal, so people go in, they make their own reservation, and then it goes through a workflow as to whether or not the individual building actually will allow that process to happen, so there's a workflow within that. So there actually is a lot of automation within that department.
So we really need a human being.
There's certain things where, at the end of the day, you have to pay the bills, and you have to approve it, and you have to look at it, and, you can't bypass that control feature within, the finances of that department.
Just thought I'd ask. You never know. And actually, another question, just going back to last year, the solar battery project, I was just curious if I know the utility use and everything has been different than usual, but have we experienced any utility optimization because of the battery storage, the solar storage, or have we not done that yet?
So it's not, the project's not completed because of everything that has been going on. Of course, it took longer for the permit process to happen, but I do believe that the battery is actually installed as of now, but it's not up and running and commissioned.
Okay. I just thought I was curious about that. I remember that project we talked about quite a bit, so. What other questions? I'll start with Nancy this time, so you don't have to go last.
So I don't have a lot of questions. The one thing I regret, Mr. Person, not being here is just that to thank him and his staff for getting us, like Amanda said, up over the summer and in an ongoing way. It is, I know, a tremendous amount of work that's been done at all levels of the district to get us to this point and to keep us going as we have, but it is amazing when you look at all the different ways that things were adapted so quickly. So please pass that along to him. The only thing about the custodial position, my question with that is there were some custodial, we were doing some, last year, that big presentation he did on where certain number of custodial positions put us in a kind of graded way of, and it seems like we were a little bit below where we would have wanted to be. Any sense of how close this puts us to where we do want to be?
So this puts the Elmwood and Hopkins, if you will, we were talking about levels.
Right.
Adding this position will actually drop them fully into a better level, if you will. So the Marathon School was in okay condition in terms of where we were, because of course you're looking at younger students, the little ones are a little bit messier in terms of what they do, but our staffing is actually 2.5 at night as opposed to 1.5. So, there is a difference. But it is something that we're looking at as a phased approach in trying to bring on more staff.
Thank you.
I just want to echo Amanda and Nancy's praise of Mr. Parsons and the Buildings and Ground crew for all they've done during COVID, too. And the budget seems very reasonable to me, but I do wonder about that $187,000 to cover the cost of perhaps related PPE for next year, when that's still such a big question mark. Especially, maybe you could say more about what kinds of gear are needed?
Hand sanitizer, as a for instance, we go through gallons and gallons of hand sanitizer. As you notice, there's hand sanitizer stations all around the district at, every entry point, classrooms, large areas. Masks, of course, is another. Something such as plexiglass we should be stable on.
Yeah.
But, and then of course, gowns, as we use that for the nurse's office, we'll use those in the intensive programs. So those are the things that we're going through. And it is a difficult number to look at.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if we're not prepared and we're in this same element, that would be challenging, So as we move along in the budget cycle, will we come up with a different way of tackling that? Maybe. But for now, it's important to keep that in front of people for the understanding of this is a potential cost, no matter who pays for it. Will we get more federal funding? It remains to be seen.
Right.
Yeah.
Better to be prepared. I agree.
Yeah, it is a hard number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll get more CARES funding if
That would be nice.
the need arises.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank you for going through it. I appreciated the explanation on the PPE, and trust, as you have with other things, you'll apply for reimbursement if any programs come about, as we did for this year. And then the second big thing was the lost lease money coming in and having to fill that gap that due to the loss of revenue. So,
Right.
yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Well, thank you very much for that, and please thank Mr. Person for us.
I will. And thank you for your kind words to him and his staff.
But no more trucks. Tim, I said that.
Dr. Kavanaugh, we are on to the superintendent's report.
Let me grab that screen.
Tough act to follow after
I know, right?
Yes, while we're waiting for that to pop there, I should say that over the summer, probably the three people who presented budgets tonight did amazing amounts of work. If you think about Dr. Zaleski running ESY, and she really was the forerunner into bringing kids back into our buildings. And, obviously, Mr. Person did amazing things with his crew. And it's not just a matter of, kind of keeping the building clean, but every single hand sanitizer, new towel dispenser, piece of plexiglass, they brought all of those pieces into our district. And then the last thing I'll say about Mr. Ghosh is you always associate him with sort of the hardware, that machine, but he and Mrs. Parsons did such a good job this summer, coming up with professional learning. When we changed his title to add the, innovative learning part of, he really does do an awful lot of work with, I think, curriculum and instruction that we don't necessarily see or associate with his position, so. Uh-oh, why is this telling me it can't get me there? There we go.
Yeah, the one question I regret not asking him was how his opinion on how things are going with all the new equipment for tele-education. So we'll catch up separately on that.
Just show it this way. All right, so I had promised I was going to have a very short superintendent's report tonight, but that turned out to be a fib. What started to happen was, I was thinking a lot about my last superintendent's report, which was only 3 days ago and also very long, but I wanted to have more conversation about enrollment, and I think it's relevant to tonight's presentations because it's really budget related. And I think when you hear from the building principals in the next couple of coming weeks, you're going to hear that, like Mr. Ghosh tonight said, I had one other position in here, and now I had asked for 2, I'm down to 1. And I think that's going to be kind of a repeated theme, and that theme has come about because we really do not have any idea of 2 things, really. What is the COVID situation going to look like in the fall of 2022? So will we still need to have hybrid and remote, or will all of our kids be back in school full-time, right? How much money will we be spending on hand sanitizer, plexiglass, paper towels, all that? But the second piece, I think, is enrollment. And right now, our enrollment is such that you might think we could just slide seamlessly into the coming year, but I don't necessarily know that that is true. And these are all the ifs that I thought were worth presenting tonight.
Great.
All right, so these are numbers that I got from Arthur Wagman, who's been doing some work in the district from us, and the population in Hopkinton in 2015, according to Dr. Wagman's work, was 16,512. By 2019, it was up to 18,470. So a significant increase in just 4 years' time. And I think typically what happens in periods of economic upheaval, people stop buying houses and they stop spending money and they become very cautious. And you would think that that's what would be happening in Hopkinton during the pandemic. But according to the local realtors, really there is a almost less than 14-day inventory for homes. A house goes on the market and immediately it is scooped up by someone, which means that there are way more buyers than we have sellers right now. If we look at Realtor.com, the median home price in Hopkinton, they will tell us is $674,000. According to Tim O'Leary, the town CFO, the mean home price in Hopkinton right now is $632,000. Those are very high home prices. And still, and if we think about it, we're talking the median and the mean, and still, people are finding their way to Hopkinton and buying homes here. So that's one of the reasons why I say I can't be sure about enrollment for next year. I think it's important that we don't just think about land in available houses, but we'll talk about that first. So why is there so little inventory? There's still that incredible westward movement coming out of, the Boston area and spreading west at this point. And Hopkinton is exceedingly desirable. You all know that Niche ranked Hopkinton number 1 in 3 categories, and U.S. News and World Report says Hopkinton High School is 3rd in the Commonwealth, but we're 3rd after an exam school, and we're 3rd after a charter school. They get to sort of choose their clientele, so to speak, and so we really are, I think, in that rating, the number 1 public high school. There's nice, easy, accessible commuter rail lines in neighboring communities. This town still has that lovely sort of suburban, if not agrarian, feel. And honestly, your services, your DPH, your DPW, fire, police, youth and family services, senior care, all of those folks, amazing, the services. Another thing relative, I think, to the pandemic is that right now your empty nesters might not be putting their houses on the market. Lots of times when people have their children graduate from high school, they say, well, we don't need this gigantic house any longer in the town of Hopkinton, and we could probably pay a little bit less in taxes if we move somewhere else. But people haven't done that right now. And they haven't done that perhaps because their college-aged kids are learning from home. They haven't actually made it to that college campus. Or we know that colleges are doing sort of those reduced time periods where kids are on campus, so a lot of kids will come home now at Thanksgiving and stay home until February, for example. So their kids are coming home and need those spaces, and you used to have big empty bedrooms there, but now you've turned them into home offices, or you've put in your treadmills and your weights, and now you've got your home gym because you can't really or don't feel comfortable really accessing the gym you used to. And then we look at, would you typically have bought a condo, and that would have allowed you to downsize, but realistically you have no mortgage left, and there's no need to buy that condo right now. The condo probably doesn't cost you a whole lot less than the house does, and you love your space. So those are some of the reasons we think, I guess theoretically, that empty nesters aren't putting their houses on the market. So it begs the question then, what is going to happen when we emerge from this pandemic? I think that there will still be people who are very interested in moving to Hopkinton. I think that, there'll be more inventory, and we may see that influx of folks. And what is going to happen if that does happen in terms of our public schools? Like, what will happen if we plan a budget based on the kids who are in front of us now, and on August 15th of 2022, we are sitting here and we've got hundreds more kids in front of us. What other factors might impact enrollment? Dr. Wagman's prediction right now about the birth rate in Hopkinton is that we should probably expect about 150 children to be born in Hopkinton each year over the next 10 years. And we have to remember that even though that might be the birth rate, and let's remember, to be fair, it's a projected birth rate. Even if that is the projected birth rate, children and families will come and go and move into Hopkinton as well. There are theories that there may be a baby boom as a result of the pandemic. Currently, there are preschool-age children who live in the community, and we really don't know how many of those children there are. We talk a lot about the rapid rate of growth in Hopkinton, because we say, well, once Legacy Farms is entirely built out, that rapid rate of growth should slow. And I believe that that's true, but I don't think that construction entirely is going to stop. Legacy has, I think, about 300 additional homes yet to be built, but there's, Wayland, Whisper Way, Highland Park, Maspinock, and a lot of other smaller developments out there. And I think that, one of the things that the town and I, we've had conversations about is, even if we don't think that there'll be sort of another enormous housing development put into place in the near future, we'd be really naive to think that there aren't developers out there looking at smaller parcels of land where you can put 10 homes or 15 homes or 4 homes and that there aren't going to be individual families who find that small parcel of land and build their own home. All of that said, there are a few large parcels remaining, so, we could look at the Y, we can look at the laborers' piece of property, and those are still there. And then finally, we really don't have any idea right now how many families have held their kids out or who will return their children to our public schools after the pandemic is over. People have asked me how many students have withdrawn. As of October 1st, 2019, we had 97 students who had withdrawn, and as of October 1st of this year, we had 159. So there is that difference of 62 students. In 2019, we had 18 kids on the books for homeschooling. Today, we have 34 kids on the books for homeschooling. And when students withdraw, we do ask them for a reason. 20 of them have said that they are homeschooling. 48 have said that they are attending private in-state schools. So it's hard to know if those students will come back to us. 50 have said that they are attending out-of-state, public or private. And some of those private schools could be out-of-state, which might bring kids back. And then public in-state schools, it's unlikely those students would ever come back. And again, we still don't know how many families have held their kindergarten students out of school and will want to enroll them in K next year. So when we talk about Marathon, that would be an interesting dynamic to see at the K-1 level next year. When we think about where Dr. Wagman had projected we would be without a pandemic, at the end of the 2021 school year, so at the end of this year, he had projected that we would be at 4,111. And a lot of times you can be at 4,050, for example, at this point in the year, and kids keep trickling in over the year, and you end up at the 4,111. Right now, our enrollment is 3,916. So if you take the difference from his June projection to today's actual, we're down 195 kids based on where he said we would be. That said, I don't want you to think we're less than we were last year because we anticipated we'd have 236 kids. So our net gain this year is still at 41. So we still are ahead of where we were last year, but we certainly are not at the 4,111 that he projected we would be at. All right, so I've gone a long way to sort of show you all of those pieces and say we really don't know at all where we will be next year, given all of those crazy factors. Certificates of occupancy, kids coming back, maybe more kids going out. Will we be hybrid and remote again to make more kids even leave? We really don't know. But I've gone through this process just to indicate that after you start to see our principals' budgets, to be very fair, they could be back in front of this committee in August, and I just want people to be aware that that could be a very real situation due to enrollment. All right, now I will totally switch gears and talk a little bit about what will be happening in the week after Thanksgiving. We have tomorrow morning an email will be sent to all of our faculty, staff, paraprofessionals, and everyone in the Hopkins community and school community, as well as to families. And we'll be outlining our plans for the week after Thanksgiving. What we have come to realize is that there will be lots of people inside our school community, lots of families who are going to be traveling out of state. If you've seen the lines on TV now for testing, you realize that it's going to be very, very hard not only to get a test, but for that test to come back. So for folks who are traveling, and I don't want people to think that this is the only reason we're doing it, but people who are traveling, it's going to be difficult to get folks physically back into our schools because it's not unlikely that people will need to quarantine until their tests come back. The second thing, and this comes from our Department of Public Health, when I've talked to our health director, Sean McAuliffe, his worry is that, over Thanksgiving, people will get together with family and friends, and we very often trust the people who are in our bubble, or we sometimes invite other people into our bubble, or we've had this lovely neighbor group that we've gotten together with for a very long time, but college kids will be coming home, and I think we'll kind of let our guards down a little bit because it is a big holiday that we typically celebrate. So masks will be off, food will be eaten, friends will be had, and the worry is that could produce positive COVID cases in the coming week. So say there's a 7-day incubation period, and I'm not a public health official, but throwing that number out there, about a week after Thanksgiving, we could start to see a lot of COVID-positive cases. I think, and this is not news that I want to be delivering, but I think what people don't realize is that when you have one positive person in your schools, and we had 2 on Wednesday alone of this week. Well, that was only yesterday. So what happens is, everything sort of stops, and you get your public health officials, your school nurses, your building principal, me, we all get into what we call our huddle, and we create a very, very long list of any student or faculty member who could be what we would call a close contact. Now, all of those people have to be asked to leave our school community. So if you've got a kid who's just a close contact because he was riding the bus or because he sat next to another student at lunch, everybody goes home. And then they all go and get tested, and, even after testing, the close contacts, well, it used to be 14, but with the governor's order and the public health change yesterday, it can now be whittled down to 10. But either way, it's a lot of days out of school for the people who are close contacts, and a lot of days out of school for the people who are COVID positive. In some ways, the feeling is that it will be far more disruptive to start having all of those, oh my gosh, it's time for a huddle, we're going to send 10 kids home, 15 kids home, 3 teachers home, 5 teachers home, 2 paraprofessionals home, 1 custodian home, a bus driver out, than it would be to say, let's just go remote for a week. So that is the plan from November 30th to December 4th. We will do remote learning for our typical hybrid in-school kids, and we'll keep our orange and green cohorts intact. Hopefully, this is going to mean that when we get back on that following Monday in December, what I hope that means is that, we're going to be able to go all the way to the December break, in person, great learning, and keep learning up and running for everybody in the week after Thanksgiving as well. I know remote isn't ideal. I know people chose hybrid for a reason. I truly wish I wasn't delivering this information, but given health department recommendations and travel plans, I think it probably makes the best sense to be doing this now. All right, just a couple of highlights from Hopkins School Spirit Day today. I did go over to have a little bit of joy with children. In our left-hand picture, there was a classroom that took on Star Wars costumes. In the middle, we had an entire zoo. And over on the right, we had kids who were dressed up like apples to apples. I thought that was cute. I just loved this. When I got there, we had one of our music teachers out in the hallway working on violin instruction with an individual student. It was just so lovely to see that out there. Just a really quick picture of what the high school is looking like from the back. It looks like there's great progress being made out there. So those are the 6 new classrooms. I mean, architecturally, if you stand back there, even without any brick there yet, it really does look like it fits seamlessly into the architecture. And just lastly, a reiteration, we can't say it enough, of our rankings. And I do want to thank all of our teachers, because that's how we get to be the best in Massachusetts, really, and all of our administrators, paraprofessionals. It really takes a village, the 3 administrators and all their teams that you see here tonight. So thank you to all of them, and to parents for their ongoing support. And that's all.
Thank you. You really pack a wall up with those superintendent reports. I'm going to say a little more time. Thank you so much. And, just a comment on the Thanksgiving decision. I'm thankful that you're making that decision now so that families and staff and teachers can prepare for that. And I'm thinking it's going to probably provide more continuity of learning if we don't have to have a lot of substitutes and switching back and forth and learning modes and whatever and quarantining. I'm hoping that it's a better learning week than, if we look at, Canada after their Thanksgiving, and, we see patterns of spikes after these holidays, and if we can manage it for a week and then be good to go, that would be really good. So thank you for thinking in advance about next week.
Thank you. Yeah,
Questions or
it's not
comments?
ideal. It's better, I think, for learning.
Anybody? Joe?
I know it's a tough decision. There's no easy way to do it. I hope that people don't travel, we won't be traveling. If you travel, you're putting the community at risk of spread. So if at all possible, if I could say to my friends out there, please consider not traveling. I feel that the schools are the safest place for people to be, and I'm concerned, I agree with your decision, but I'm concerned what happens in the week after Thanksgiving when people aren't in school. Will they be socializing more than they would be if they were in school? And so my concern would be for the week after too, but we'll have to take it one bit at a time.
Yes.
I don't like it, but I don't see another way to do it if we can't mandate, which we can't, for people to not move around.
Yes, and I do agree with you. If we're having kids and families out for a week, I hope people are making responsible choices so that, they're using the time to learn because they are school days, and, that they'll return to us on the following Monday.
Can you describe what the learning experience will be, or reiterate again for the people who are home in schooling that week? If you're elementary and you would have had an in-school hybrid day, will that day be at home guided throughout the day with... Okay.
It will, yes. Building principals will be, sending schedules so that, and teachers obviously, to all of their students so that, kids know if it's my period 1 class, I log on at, 5 minutes of 8 or whatever, and that's, a Spanish class, and then I'll be out of there in 55 minutes and I'll be into another class. So it will, they'll get schedules, or if at 8:30 we start with guided reading, the teacher's there and ready to do guided reading. So, yes, schedules will go out from building principals and/or classroom teachers.
I agree with this decision. I think that it's not an easy one in the face of a lot of differing opinions in, both from the state level and from different people in the community. I do think that I hope that this will allow us to continue in our hybrid model longer than having, I know, Representative Dykema had reported today that Hopkinton has seen an increase has seen 18 new cases in the past week, or something of that nature, which is alarming. So hopefully having that extra week will buffer against college students and other family members who are coming for Thanksgiving. So
Yeah, there's been a pretty big uptick here.
yeah, so I appreciate that as not just a school committee member, but as a parent. So
Yes, and I think I had reported before on the commissioner's, sort of attitude about taking time after Thanksgiving, or using remote time after Thanksgiving, and we had a meeting with him today where he had really kind of softened that and, had just said, if that's your plan, just let the department know. So I think he's backpedaled a little bit on it, too.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for the enrollment conversation. We need to keep that going, so
We do.
I appreciate that.
Yes.
I think that moves us to the chair report. I'll be super quick so we can move along.
it's tough to have to keep following her act.
I know, right? We've already talked about the email that we received. We also received another one about, with a question about synchronous learning time on the home days for the hybrid model, which I believe Dr. Kavanaugh is going to answer. Next slide, sorry. The Budget Advisory Group met today. I'm happy to report, and we will be meeting on an ongoing basis. The town CFO has put together a very nice model to start to assemble all of the numbers from all the departments, and it is, it's a very clear process. It was a really good meeting today to sort of kick off this budget season. And just I highlighted 2 things that, just to share, to reiterate. The budgeting in all departments in the town is based on sort of normal operations and for the school's current enrollment. So even though we know that it might not be normal, and it might not be at the same enrollment, that we have, the budgeting is generally guided by a non-pandemic scenario. So that's how the departments are looking at their budgets. And I signed several warrants, which we'll talk about at the end. And I sat, next slide here. I sat around trying to think about, it's Thanksgiving, and we have so many people to thank, and I think I probably left groups off, but I was thinking about what it takes to make the district tick and earn us the recognitions that we get and so forth. And, there's just such a village of people and organizations that come together, and again, I probably haven't even listed them all, but I was kind of thinking, there's childcare, and I mean, Board of Health and the bus drivers and, our legislators who are lobbying for our budgets. And, there's just this whole universe of people and volunteers and parents and teachers and students, of course, grandparents and caregivers. And I just would like to say thank you, because without the community, the broad community, we just couldn't do what we do. And so happy Thanksgiving to everybody. And we have a masked turkey, because this is the year that we wear masks. All right, so that brings us to our liaison reports. We just met Monday, so I'm assuming there aren't too many. Did you?
The Growth Study Committee met last night, and we had a really interesting overview of the town's financial situation from the town CFO, Tim O'Leary, and he's developed a tool that allows you to kind of put in different assumptions on growth and see how tax revenue is impacted. And, he instructed the committee on how to think about new growth revenue and things like that. So very fascinating. I'm glad we're part of that committee, and a lot of the kind of things Carol just talked about in the population assessment are things the Growth Study Committee is looking at as well.
Great, thank you.
I don't have a liaison report, but I feel like we should give Joe a star, because he's been doing school committee-related things every night this week.
And the superintendent, too.
Yeah, and the superintendent, yeah.
It's extra gold stars. Any other liaison reports for tonight? Okay, let's move on. Office hours, we will publish those for early December. Stay tuned, and please watch your email for that. That brings us to new business. We have school start time discussion. Dr. Kavanaugh.
Okay. Happy to talk about this. I know that a couple of the school committee members have brought this forward to, really think about start times, and I think probably you brought it forward in the context of, what is good, I think, especially for secondary students who, appear to need later start times because they need different sleep hours, so to speak. One of the things that, and I know that probably about 5 years ago, just before I got to Hopkinton, I think that Dr. McLeod had conducted, a pretty good, kind of study around this, and brought a lot of people in the community together to kind of research what a different start time would look like. I also know that last year, Mrs. Rodnick and I had conversations about changing start times because our goal would have been at that time, and still might be for the 21-22 school year, our goal would be to think about 2 tiers of busing as opposed to 3 tiers of busing. We're always talking about how, the high school kids get dropped off somewhere between 7 and 7:20, and then the buses zip right out, and then they have to do that Hopkins run. And they have to really cover the, 28 square miles that is Hopkinton, and get back to Hopkins in a very short period of time. And then off they go again, and then they've got to get everybody to 2 schools, so some of them are dropping off at Elmwood and zipping across town to Marathon, some are dropping off at Marathon and zipping across. So I guess to make a very long story short, because of that middle tier, it essentially shortens the amount of time that everyone has for those runs. If we were to have 2 tiers of busing next year, and naturally this is something that would have to be, obviously discussed with the Teachers Association. There's an article in the contract right now that talks about start times. It also says that, the school committee can change start times, but of course there is an impact on teachers' lives, so the respectful, thing to do is certainly to have those kinds of conversations and bargain that with them. But one of the things that we looked at last year was to say, what if high school, middle school started at 8 o'clock and the elementary schools, all 3, started at 9 o'clock? That would give you a full run, a full hour to do those bus runs for Hopkins and Elmwood and Marathon. So that's another piece of this puzzle. The last part of it is if it does become the committee's desire to really look at start times in a way that, takes a look at, how does it impact athletics, how does it impact kids who have to go home and care for younger siblings, or kids who have part-time jobs, how does it impact sleep and sleep study kind of materials, then I would think that that would be something that we would need to put together, not immediately. Because right now, in the midst of this pandemic, I feel like people are just kind of holding it together on a shoestring, so to speak. We are, I think you'd need all of your building principals to kind of get involved in this group, and you'd probably need a good number of teachers to kind of get involved in this group. And parents and all of those people, and then a group of experts. And I think that right now, I don't necessarily know that anyone has sort of the strength, really, to be able to carry on a group that I think that would be doing that kind of important and time-consuming work while we're also trying to live through the pandemic. So I think if the latter is what you're kind of looking for, I'm not opposed to putting something like that together. I think I would just recommend that we don't do that in the immediate, that we think about that. Maybe when we get to the spring, what would that look like if we were thinking about a huge study that was a year-long commitment, for example. I know that when most other communities have made changes to start times, something different than just, changing the busing, for example, they have spent almost a year, doing all kinds of, sleep studies and lots of literature and lots of people involved and all of that. So it's just an issue of timing.
Thank you for that. So this item, as you mentioned, came forth, Meg, you originally raised this topic, and then Leah also raised it, so I didn't know if you wanted to say anything or ask any questions.
I hear you about the fatigue and tackling something like this in the midst of the pandemic, but we're also making plans for PPE next year, and, we're thinking about a lot of things at once. We can juggle a lot, especially in this district. It's been proven to me we can. And, I'm interested because I think there have been so many comprehensive studies done about sleep. If you look at the Academy of American Pediatrics, if you look at the National Sleep Foundation, it all tells us that students' health is depending upon that extra hour or so of sleep. And sure, we can postpone it. I don't think it's worth, my straining over this, but I just think it's an important thing for us to look at because of student health. And we talk a lot about student health, but then we neglect the fact that they're not getting enough sleep. And, what I'm hearing this year is the students who are on the hybrid schedule are so grateful they can sleep in on those days that they're home. So to me, it just felt like a more natural time to actually segue into something. I don't think we need to do a year-long study because so much work has already been done. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. And if we have this incentive to run the 2 bus tiers, it just makes sense to me. But I'm in the minority, and that's where I feel comfortable.
I don't know that you are. I don't know if you're in the minority. I think, this is our opportunity to talk about it, so.
And I think we can do the 2 bus tiers. So I think it's 2 different things.
Right.
We can do that first proposal that, like Dr. Kavanaugh spoke about, without doing the year-long study.
Right, and we talked about the contract and perhaps putting some flexible language in there, but I feel like really it's student health. If that's what's actually important to us, then the foundation of health is sleep. And I'm not sure how you argue against that, but I'm willing to listen to any argument against it.
So, I don't know that you're in the minority in this group here at all. I think it's been controversial in the community for a number of reasons. I know when we did the study 5 years ago, or whatever it was, the different ways to achieve that, some of them were less desirable than others. I think our secondary students right now, many of them are getting on the bus when it's dark. And I don't know that, even if we did a year-long study or whatever it is, I don't know that there's any group of kids that should be getting on the bus in the dark, really, ever. If the transportation thing was something that we could seriously consider doing, I think there are a lot of benefits to that, and it would also have a benefit of kids starting at 8 o'clock, I would think would prevent anyone from ever having to get on the bus when it's dark out.
Exactly.
But that just seems cruel.
I think so too.
Yeah, and we did talk last year about the 2 tiers of busing and never quite got there. I think we talked about it in the spring.
Pandemic.
Little pandemic came about.
Got in the way, but I do think that accomplishes a lot of different checks for all of us without getting into some of the more controversial and difficult decisions that would have to be made with literally all of the other solutions that group looked at to achieve making a later start time for the secondary students. Just my sense.
I guess I've just come through the busiest summer of my life on the reentry committee where we accomplished an incredible amount in a very short amount of time. So for us to, spin the wheel continually on start times for another year seems to me a little disingenuous, especially because we said that, we wanted people to follow the hybrid schedule for their health. And even though the majority of parents wanted people back full-time, we said for their health. So I'm just trying to, continue with the logic that we crafted and upheld over the summer.
Can I ask you though, because it sounds like the transportation fix would be a quick
It would be
Would that address kind of where you're coming from?
I think so. It gives the kids an extra hour of sleep, most likely.
Your parents too.
Yeah, well, parents, we don't sleep anymore. Do you?
Yeah, and I don't mean to imply that it would take an entire year to do all of the research and the study and how does it impact families and all that, but it would be unnatural to begin a school year with one set of times and then somehow switch in the middle of school. You know what I'm saying? So either you're prepared to do it on September 1st, so to speak,
I agree.
or it's the following September 1st.
I agree. I was just worried that it was going to be pushed off another 2 years. If you don't start speaking about to the spring, then there's a whole other year of conversation.
So if we wanted to have more discussion about the busing piece, the 8 and 9, the 2-tier busing, what would be the next step for that? To have that conversation, is there a next step you could recommend, or do we just revisit this?
Well, I think a lot of the sort of next step is for Mrs. Roderick to look to see how feasible is that, just in the most practical sense of running 31 buses across 28 miles within an hour's time for, sort of 2 different tiers, one to do secondary, one to do elementary.
And we actually did do that work last year. So the year prior, we've actually been talking about this for a little while.
Right.
The year prior, when we ran the analysis, we would have needed to add buses. But last year, we did add buses. So the 31 buses that we have now did seem to work to do that split. So the natural pairing would be to put Marathon and Hopkins together so that we don't have buses zipping across town. And then, so when you talk about the singleton, Hopkins was the singleton, Elmwood would be the singleton. So Elmwood would have their own run, and then Marathon and Hopkins kids would be doubled on to the buses. So that would be the division. You would pick up at Marathon, go to Hopkins, grab those kids, and off they go, all at the same time. So all 3 elementary schools would dismiss at the same time. So that difficulty before we added those additional buses is that we didn't have enough, but I do believe we do now.
And I know that things are skewed by how many kids we have riding the buses right now with COVID, but my recollection even prior to COVID hitting last year was that those Hopkins buses were not near capacity anyway.
They are not near capacity, that is correct. So again, to the point that Dr. Kavanaugh was making, when the buses leave at Roll, for instance, at 2 o'clock, they have to be back to Hopkins by 2:20.
Oh, wow.
Just to give you an idea of, how constrained we are for time, because then Hopkins dismisses at 2:30. So you really have no time to run those buses, and certainly not efficiently and at, a capacity that makes sense, both with time and ridership.
So again, accomplishing multiple goals.
It does accomplish multiple things, yes.
That's very good.
Yes, pre-pandemic, you could watch some buses leave Hopkins with 6, 8, 10 kids on them because we were running so many buses for so few students. There's a lot of parent pickup in that building, so, say you had 300 kids riding 30 buses. That was just crazy.
Yeah. I'm curious what happens with parent pickup when they have kids in 3 schools that dismiss at the same time.
Yeah, it's a problem.
It sounds like a problem, but,
Yeah, and right now, we do have people who have kids in 2 schools, so, they'll do what the school bus does. They go to Elmwood, and then they cross town and go to Marathon, or they go to Marathon, and then they crisscross and go to Elmwood. But you're right, there will be that issue of, now I've got a Hopkins kid, a Marathon kid, and an Elmwood kid, how do I get that done? That will be trickier.
That's why they should.
And I think the schools are very patient.
yeah.
They know who the parents are that are doing these multiple pickups.
Yeah.
So,
Plus, sometimes the parent pickup lines are so long that you could be at the front of one and the back of another.
Yes.
Yes.
Still be on time.
That's how they
Yes,
do it.
that's absolutely right. So, I guess we bring this back. We ascertain for sure if it's feasible with our number of buses, I guess? Is it like the next step? I'm looking to you, I don't know.
I would say that with the number of buses we have, we're fine.
Would be okay.
Yeah, and so then I think it's, to bring it to the Teachers Association and, indicate that this is something we're thinking very seriously of in September of 2021.
Okay. So, I don't know, we don't have anything, this was a discussion on a vote, and we know we're missing Leah, but, maybe we bring this back for more discussion when we have Leah here and kind of keep it going, just see if we want to pursue this or not. But I feel like I'd like to, probably take a vote with Leah when she's here to see if we want to have that conversation. We could start to tease it if you want. But this is a preliminary discussion.
Right, and to bring the public in.
Yes, so we can consider what would be the impacts to think about.
Yeah.
But it could potentially be both operationally good and health-wise good, to at least look at the busing.
Could be a win-win.
Could be a win-win.
And it does feel feasible with things like after-school sports and jobs and childcare and all of that. It doesn't alter things so markedly that you would say, oh, that will never work, But of course, parents and families need to have some voice as well.
Yeah. Well, good. Thank you for starting the conversation, Meg. I appreciate it. Next topic is another fun one, full-time, in-person reopening discussion.
Oh, gosh.
I think we left off with a question about, for other districts who've been able to do this, have we had any learnings about how they've been able to do it? Are they similar to us? Can we learn anything, or are they so different that it doesn't apply? I think that was kind of where we left off.
Right. So I think I did reach out to a couple of my colleagues in other districts where we have learned that they have full-time reopening. And one of those, and you've seen it probably in the news all week, is Carlisle. But Carlisle is part of they have a K-8 school, and then they are regionalized for high school at the Concord Carlisle School. So they have a pre-K-8 building with just under 600 students there. So they've made, very good use, I think, of their space, but prior to I think that they have something crazy like a $20,000 per pupil expenditure, but even prior to the pandemic, they had class sizes of anywhere between 14 and 18 for students in that district. So if you take away the students who have chosen remote, now you're down to, class sizes of anywhere between 12 and 14. We know that in these classrooms here, we have been able to fit 12 and 14 kids, so the class size isn't an issue for them. And then they've just been, kind of clever about where they're putting kids in at lunchtime. So you just kind of spread them out in the gym, you spread them out in the cafeteria, you can leave some of the kids in classrooms so that they are, kind of rotating people through. One of the problems that we've had, I think, in thinking about having lunch in our classrooms, is that we just don't have anyone to cover that. Our teachers are entitled to a, whatever it is, like 20-minute duty-free lunch, so they wouldn't be covering their own classes. And when we think about paraprofessionals who we move all through the building all day long, we just don't have the numbers really to be able to cover the numbers of kids that we have. If you think about their whole K-8 system, that K-8 system is smaller than the Marathon School. So that's, I guess if that gives you some kind of context. I know that there was a parent who had asked me about Marlboro, so I reached out to the superintendent there, and he says, yes, we have brought back everybody in K1 and 2. Kindergarten doesn't come full days. They have sort of double sessions, so you're either a morning student for kindergarten or an afternoon student, but you come every day, so you get 5 half-days a week. Their 1s and 2s do come every single day, but 3 to 12 is entirely remote in Marlboro, so that's where they've been able to kind of recoup some of the space. I asked about lunches, and they do have kids with, cardboard in between each student. It's, kind of a cardboard product that you can wash off in between each one of the kids. So they're certainly not at 6 feet of social distancing, but, a good amount of distance between the kids with the cardboard in between them. So that's been how they've been able to manage it. And, I know that over in Holliston, I had called Peter Patello to ask what they've done. And, they really have made great use of space. They've spread kids out all over the place. So the kids who used to be in a single classroom, and you've taken away the remote kids, now they've got them spread into 2 classrooms. But what they've done is they're starting to use, I believe, their related arts teachers and their paraprofessionals. So for the first half of the day, there might be a para with those kids in that room and a teacher, and then they would flip-flop, or a teacher and a music teacher, or a PE wellness teacher, or an art teacher, and they've just maximized the use of their personnel. And that's in Holliston. But I also know that at the high school level, they are live streaming in Holliston. So, I think that makes a difference just in terms of like what they're able to do with space, So that's the information that, I kind of have on that topic. It's obviously, this is not a good time to be thinking about coming back to school with like the uptick of the virus, and we're sending out 2 kids a day, and several kids and several teachers just because they are maybe not COVID positive but close contacts. But I would really love to start thinking about what it looks like to bring back all of our kids when we get past cold and flu season. One of the things we say to people now, if you've got the sniffles, and a lot of people have the sniffles when it starts to get cold, you are not allowed to come in our schools. So please don't do that. Please, if you are sniffly, just stay home. And if you've got the sniffles and they clear up in a few days, or if you go and get COVID tested and you're negative, you just swing right back in. But I could really see us, with a vaccine that has been, a little more widely available to people, thinking about like March, April, as an opportunity for hybrid people to come back fully. I know that right now, probably the people who are remote are home thinking, I'm not going back. And one of the things that the commissioner has said is that if we've offered remote to people, we'll be doing that at least through June. So that's a promise that he has made at this point. Sometimes promises don't stay promises, but I would feel very comfortable with the remote folks staying remote and seeing if we can't bring back our hybrid people full-time in the spring, truly. I think what we heard loud and clear in that survey is that the people who are hybrid love sending their children to school. Kids love being in school. And, what we're hearing in terms of mental health is that it's really good for kids to be here. So.
Thank you for that. Any questions on that? I'm glad to hear you suggest that, and who knows what will happen with the pandemic and the vaccines. But I know in Europe, most kids have gone back full-time with just 3 feet of distance, wearing masks, and that's kind of standard business today, so I'm glad we're at least entertaining the thought.
Yes. I'm going to knock on wood of all the students or faculty members or paraprofessionals, or whoever have been positive in our schools. We take our close contacts, we ask them, to head home for their quarantine, and we ask them to go and get COVID tested. At this point in time, and I really am knocking on wood, not a single close contact has tested positive. So we are not seeing that spread in our schools. We really are not. It's just disruptive now when we're sending lots of kids home. That gets crazy.
Sure.
Yeah, I know it's kind of like we're holding two very opposite things in our head at the same time right now, because we just talked about it's probably a good idea to do the remote the week after next, but also let's talk about full reopening at the same time. So it's tough, but I do think we owe it to have a plan in place. We do see lots of positive news about potential vaccine and things like that, and there's always the potential that things don't turn out as bad as people expect right now. So I think we owe it to our kids to have a plan in place. My concern would be whether the MOA that we have in force now allows us to flip to full-time, and if there are impediments in terms of staffing, enough staff to monitor kids in the classroom. Say if you split half the kids stay in the class for lunch and half go to the cafeteria, we don't have enough staff to monitor that. I'd like to find a solution for that, even if it involves collective bargaining or something, so.
Yes. Yeah, I do think that if you wanted to bring kids back, we would certainly, when we, and I think, Amanda, you had mentioned this last time, when we've looked at the MSBA-related drawings that we got from DRA, if we look at our lunchrooms across the district, based on our student populations, our lunchrooms are exceedingly small for the numbers of kids that we have. So we would really be looking at closer than 6 feet.
Right, okay, but, right, so I'm glad to hear that we're looking at a way to make it work, right?
I agree, it's hopeful that we're looking out. I also appreciate that we're looking out far enough that it will give a chance to get through the current surge that we're in, give us a chance to get through the cold and flu and other things that may look like COVID, but aren't COVID, and all of this, but also to work with our teachers and our paraprofessionals and our staff to figure out how that reintegration of full-time would work if we're able to do it.
Right.
And it is incredibly hopeful to me that we can even entertain that. Over the summer when we were discussing the hybrid plans, I honestly wasn't sure that we'd make it to this point before things kind of blew up statewide.
Yes, I probably haven't said this publicly, but neither did I. I was very concerned. I think if we get to October, it'll be amazing. But it's been great.
Done amazingly well.
Yeah,
So much better than we predicted.
Yeah.
absolutely.
I think in a lot of ways, the schools are well ahead of what we see out in the community in terms of enforcement of masks and social distancing and whatnot.
Indeed, they'll just keep those bars and restaurants open forever.
And I appreciate the looking ahead. I'm looking at this turkey of thanks that I put up there earlier, all of those components, all of those elements, those groups, those people, teachers and students at the top have to figure out what it would look like. And so I know there's a process. It would take a process to get there. So I'm happy to hear you're thinking about it now so that those groups and people, and particularly the teachers and the administrators can figure out what would work.
Yes, and I do think right now people are still very tender,
Well, yes, cases are spiking all over the place. It is weird, as you said, Joe. It's like, on one hand, we know that this is a very tenuous time with this disease. On the other hand, we do know there's a horizon somewhere. So it is kind of an odd place to be. So
By the way, design that turkey.
I just picked that turkey off of a free internet image. I hope it was free. I hope I'm not violating any trademark. It looked free. So we're going to forge ahead. I often move items off, but I think we can forge ahead and go through our whole agenda tonight, even though we're a little bit behind. The next item on the agenda, I think, is the school committee self-evaluation. And Dr. Kavanaugh, I was wondering if you could pull my slides up. This is a very quick topic. It is really to ask the school committee if you want to look at this topic. So this is, while the slides are coming up, it's sort of in the vein of, we have a working group, I think it's Joe and myself, and we haven't actually started our work yet this year, but the intent of the working group was to look at different things that school committee does procedurally and see if we can maybe shore up those procedures and get some more formality around certain ones of them. I'm bringing this one forward for consideration. The MASC recommends that best practices that a school committee does evaluate itself. At the end of the year, everybody else gets evaluated, why not us too? MASC, if you could go to the next slide, please. The MASC has, and you can, school committee members can click through these links if they want, but the MASC has a sort of a multi-page questionnaire self-evaluation form, which I'm not sure that's the right way for us to go. I would like to sort of keep it simple, but there are some models out there. But basically, the purpose would be to ensure that we're working effectively. Is the work that we're doing aligned with the district's strategic priorities? It would give us a chance to take a moment and talk about how to improve. Sometimes we just kind of go along from meeting to meeting and we don't really stop and say, are we working well? And so this would kind of force us to do that. And it would align us with best practice. Dr. Kavanaugh. And like I said, my guiding principle with this and these procedures is keep it simple but meaningful. So if we could come up with something that would be simple and meaningful, that would be great. I just have two quick things to think about, but really my question for the committee is this something we want to look at? And then if so, Joe and I can go off and kind of look at it. But one quick take that I was thinking on the left side here, we just approved policy BBA that talked about the things that school committee does. We did that a few meetings ago. Those are the things that we do. They're documented in that policy. Across the top are things that are strategic initiatives. So one thought is to say, hey, when we're policy making, check plus, check minus. How are we doing in terms of planning for enrollment growth with our policies or supporting diversity? So can we marry what we do with the strategic initiatives? Again, this is just a quick look, maybe an easy sort of very Hopkinton-focused way of saying, are we on track with what we're doing? Next slide, please. Another quick option. MASC has a policy BAA that just documents the day-to-day operations. We could look at the very tactical side of what we do. Those are kind of the things we do, communicate with the public. We have relationships with the superintendent, we do policy development, et cetera. And again, maybe just a quick check plus, check minus, and why. I mean, it could be something as easy as that to get started. Next slide, please. I'm not saying that I know what the answer is. I'm just saying those are two potential ways to go about it. There are probably lots of other best practices to look at. So the next step is asking the committee, is it something that is of interest to you? If not, we can look at other procedures. If you would want to look at this, like I said, Joe and I can go off and do some thinking about what it might look like. If we did something like this, looking ahead, maybe we would try to do a self-evaluation at the end of the year, just prior to bringing on new members if there's a transition. And then over the summer, the school committee could adjust the documented procedure and make it better, make it worse, or decide it didn't work well and just get rid of it and take it from there. So that's all I really have to say about this. I guess I'm asking you what you'd like to do.
Do you think it would help us?
I do, actually. I mean, you know, one of the things that I think we are doing pretty well, but this is now our third year, and I think it hasn't always been this way, but I think we talk about the things that are our strategic priorities when we're making decisions. But I kind of like the idea of looking at our strategic priorities against what we do and saying, are we really supporting the district with the work that we're doing? So that, to me, is meaningful. And I kind of like a forced meeting sometime in the spring where we stop and say, hey, wait a minute, how have we done? Have we done this well, or have we gotten sidetracked by something else and forgotten about diversity, or forgotten about enrollment growth, or have we forgotten about differentiated learning, or any of our communications piece? So I like a forced checkpoint. Otherwise, I think it doesn't happen, it's a missed opportunity. So me, I like it, but it would require the committee to want to do it. And you can think about it, we can come back to the next meeting. If you want to just chew on the idea, it's not a huge thing either way, but I think if you want to think about it, we meet again on the 3rd, and we can come back and decide yes or no. I mean, I have no particular iron in the fire here. This is just one of the many recommended best practices. We can try another one.
Okay, thank you.
So let's bring it back on the 3rd, so that we can, unless you want to vote it down or up now. Bring it back?
I would say it's worth bringing back, but I would say if we could wait and bring it back after we adopt our budget, that would give us maybe some time to do that. The other piece that might be valuable, and I'm not sure how we would capture this, so I'm just going to throw it out there, would be to evaluate ourselves, but to also incorporate feedback from, say, the administrative staff, from parents, for whoever, to get some
360.
Yeah, a 360 view, that we have a view of what we're doing and what we feel we're accomplishing, but, it would be useful to have somebody else's opinion as well. So I think it could be useful to do this and figure out a way to do it, but...
That's great. We can talk more about it. If we're going to defer it, then we're setting ourselves up to start it next year, which is fine too. We don't think we want to wait too long, because, the year will end in May, and but I think that's fine. I mean, we can defer it and then have more conversation about what a 360 feedback would look like.
We could bring it back before the budget. I just don't know how many meetings we have this.
We just have December, right?
It would give us just December before.
Well, it's just to let Joe and I go off and it's not
I don't have any objection to you and Joe going off.
That's no work for you guys.
In terms of us, sitting down in a meeting and taking back the feedback of what you guys have figured out and developing a plan from there. We don't have a lot of meetings for you guys to do that and then bring it back, is more my point.
That's true, yep.
Okay, so do you want to bring it back and discuss on the 3rd what we want to do, and then kind of set up a timeline?
Yeah, let's bring it back on the 3rd, and then hopefully Dave will be back, and then, so Joe and I don't, invest the time if it doesn't seem like the year for it. Let's just wait and see if the committee wants to go in this
Brief
direction.
discussion on the 3rd like this.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Excellent. So we are going to old business. We have policy, I gotta put my glasses on to get the letters right. IHBHE Virtual Education, 3rd reading, Dr. Kavanaugh.
Okay, let me take a look at the... Okay, so with this policy, I think we have looked at it a few times. The last time we had put it together, I think that we were very pleased as a sort of working group with what this looked like. We did send it off to our legal counsel just because, this is a policy that you can't go to MASC and take a look at. This is a policy that we developed really from scratch. And our attorneys did give us a little bit of advice. In some places, added a word, crossed a word out. So those things I felt like were not sort of big, meaningful changes. But I think when we got to the virtual education rules and responsibilities section, though that was a section where there appears to be quite a bit of pink text where they're kind of recommending that we add in, some language there that just kind of shores things up a little bit. So I guess what I am recommending is that the policy working group take a look at the attorney's recommendations one last time, and then we bring it back on December 3rd. And I think at that point in time, it will be in sort of super polished and fabulous condition. That's what I would recommend.
I also don't think the version in the packet doesn't exactly reflect the attorney's comments either, so it'd be good for the community to see the final.
Yes, the one that's in the packet is really what we had done with your advice last time, and then we got this back from the attorney after that, so.
Is everybody okay with putting the vote off for one more week? Yep. Were there any comments from the public that came into anybody? I didn't see any.
Since then,
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. That brings us to policy GCRD, tutoring for pay.
Okay, so we have been sort of back and forth on this one a little bit, and, there was a lot of concern about, how to craft language that talked about whether or not a current teacher of a student could recommend tutoring. And what we ended up doing was we looked at MASC, and then we also looked at Westboro, and they had a little paragraph that we thought we liked quite well. So we left the definition of tutoring up at the top. You can see that there's strike-through on a couple of those very small paragraphs that we used to have, and then we just wholesale took the Westboro Public Schools language, which really does allow a teacher to recommend tutoring, and that would happen only if the teacher agrees that it would be of real help to the student. And then if tutoring does seem to be advisable based on a whole group's decision, the principal or guidance counselor would give the parents a list of people who would be willing to tutor and sort of qualified to do so. And this list may include teachers, but not the student's teacher of the subject in which that student would be tutored. So what's kind of nice about that is, if you're a math teacher and you say, I really do feel like some outside tutoring would be helpful, a group kind of looks at it, and then a tutor other than the actual classroom teacher would be recommended, or would be selected by parents. And then finally, we did leave our own language in there at the end, saying that if you are a teacher and you're tutoring, you just can't use our school materials, classrooms, resources, that kind of thing. So this is one that I think the three of us all agreed we liked quite well.
So, I do have one concern, which is that if a classroom teacher is recommending that a child receive private tutoring, it would seem that there is an acknowledged gap in what the child's instruction is. And my concern would be kind of the line at which that is the district's responsibility versus if they're recommending it to somebody who doesn't have the financial resources to access private tutoring. Does that set up an inequality?
I think I would say, yes, I think that does, because if we're asking for tutoring, and, I think that in some cases, you can get, a National Honor Society student who would be willing to volunteer to do that kind of work, but I also wonder, and I don't mean any disrespect to a National Honor Society student, but if you have somebody who is trained in teaching a third grader how to read, that's very different from, a 17-year-old who says, hey, I can help you with some of those math problems, which is, an entirely different situation. But yes, I do think that probably, sets up, inequity. And I feel like there's a lot of that happens, in public schools, and I don't necessarily know it's helpful for the public school itself to be contributing to it.
Is this a big issue? And is this conflict that we're addressing in this policy, is it a big issue?
I think that historically it's been a little bit of an issue because many years ago, they would say a teacher couldn't recommend tutoring because they didn't want the teacher herself sort of generating work for herself, which, that has certainly gone away. But then it also becomes an issue because if the student isn't making sort of effective progress in that classroom and the teacher makes a recommendation for tutoring, is it because a child isn't making that kind of progress, or maybe it's just helpful for a kid to gain confidence or have more practice, and that I think would be, something that would be helpful to a kid, but not something that the school district, I think, is remiss as a result of the fact that the child could use practice or doesn't have the confidence or could use that kind of coaching. So it's just all over the place, and you get to that place where you think maybe someone shouldn't be recommending this because the responsibility in some cases shouldn't be on the parent to provide it, but rather on the school district to provide it.
Right.
That's the problem.
That would be my concern, and do you think the policy addresses that? So, it would become pretty obvious if you had a whole lot of students in a classroom being recommended tutoring, right? Are there safeguards, or how do you we do want the district to provide that, right, in most cases.
Right. Typically, what will happen is, if a teacher finds that a student isn't making great progress, we have support teams in schools. So we might go to Mrs. Carver and say, here's the second grader, and I really feel like this team should take a look at this particular student, and then, we'll set particular goals for that kid and try some interventions and see how they work. Sometimes things go swimmingly, and sometimes, a student is put on an IEP, but obviously there's a very long timeline for all of that to take place.
So I guess my question is, as written, does the policy kind of ensure you go through those steps first before recommending tutoring? That would be a way, or some other way to prevent just kind of immediately going to tutoring for services that should be delivered by the district?
Yeah, and I think those two things live in very different worlds. I think our teachers all know that when you have a student who's struggling, you take that student to, your student support team. And some people will call it LST, learning support, SST, student support, BEST teams. We have all different kinds of acronyms, but that happens all over public schools, that we take a look at a particular student and say, let's try these interventions. They have to be measurable. How did the student fare with the intervention?
The language of the policy, this is what we've struggled with. It kind of dodges responsibility by saying tutoring is not to be recommended for a student, but it never says by whom that tutoring might not be recommended. So I feel like we're still dancing around the issue a bit. Because really, should a teacher these days, when there is so much oversight in the classroom about a struggling student, being paired with other support systems, should a teacher really be saying this kid needs tutoring? Any kid needs tutoring outside of what the school is affording. I'm just thinking out loud here, because we've talked about this.
I'm sorry.
And we like this because we had noted in here that as long as the teacher of the student involved is consulted, so that was one extra person being consulted, also that everyone agrees it would be real help to the student, so it has to be a thoughtful decision by a number of people, and you have to consult with the principal or guidance counselor too. So we felt that there were enough people involved to catch any strange cases where a teacher was trying to make an extra buck.
Right. I'm actually not worried about the teacher looking for self-gain so much as I am the family that doesn't have the financial resources who's going to be told that their child needs tutoring, and where do they go from there? If your teacher comes to the parent and says, your son or your daughter would really benefit for tutoring, and as a parent, if you can't provide that, a lot of parents are not comfortable saying, that would be great, but we don't have the money, or we're struggling because, one of us lost a job, or, whatever the reason is.
The problem is this happens with or without that taking place, because the parents who have money will hire the tutor.
It does, but to me, the difference when it's coming from the parents being driven to feel like they would like their child to have that versus the school recognizing that there's an educational deficit of some sort, which a child would then benefit from tutoring. I would worry that it feels like that to me feels like it's the district's responsibility.
No, I don't disagree with you. And I think that there are all different reasons why you would ask for tutoring. So if there's a great big learning gap, I think that's kind of on the school. But if I'm, a 7th grade math teacher and I can watch a kid do a problem and I say, my gosh, that kid really does know, he just doesn't have the confidence, or, boy, if he practiced 7 or 8 of those problems, every day, my goodness, would he be good at it, like that's different to me. Those are two different scenarios. So it's all very gray, it really is. And so, most districts do have a tutoring policy. I feel like we have to have some kind of policy because of the absence of one. The grayness just gets hazier.
We have one, though. See, this
Yes.
So, yeah, and we've had one since 2017. So I guess I'm wondering, I'm not sure that I am comfortable with the new language. What prompted the look at this? What was there an issue that prompted? I can't go back. I can't remember now what brought this to the fore.
We were not happy with the idea that a teacher could never recommend tutoring.
Okay.
That's where we were with it.
But that's where it kind of gets to, the way it was worded addresses your concern more, that it's...
And maybe I'm struggling with I don't know what the remedy for the family that can't access private tutoring would be. If a teacher's recommending it and the family's not able to provide it, what's the remedy? I'm not asking because I expect you to know what's going through my head of...
It's a good question.
I don't know. I'm not trying to be a difficult stick in moving forward what might be important to make improvements on. I just...
Yeah, no, and I'm just telling you about the dialogue that we had. You know, the difference, the fundamental difference is that the old language said, you can't make a recommendation. The new language says, well, you shouldn't, but under these circumstances, okay.
Maybe if the circumstances were, if either the circumstances were clear, and maybe that's getting too in the weeds to say why a student might benefit from tutoring.
Can everybody just do the right thing? See what happens when you don't.
So I think we need to sit on this.
Okay.
I don't think we're ready. It sounds like we need to get some comfort with this, and, maybe all of us go back and kind of think about this a little bit more. Again, the policy subcommittee working group has been doing yeoman's work.
Yes.
So thank you for that. You come here and we propose it, which is...
It's very tricky, this one, but
It is tricky.
I have my qualms about, even outside the district responsibility, parents who can afford to hire teachers outside of school, it's putting those other kids at a disadvantage.
Yes.
So should we just ban it entirely? If you're a public school teacher in this district, you cannot tutor these kids outside of school because you're giving an advantage to the parents who have money.
Let's come back to it. I think we got to give this one some thought, so let's bring back it again. Sorry about that. Future agenda items? I do want to revisit when you do hear back from, I think, is it Chuck Joseph?
Very busy.
So maybe for like February-ish, if we can maybe target that time frame, that'd be good. Anybody else?
If the district is going remote that week, are we going remote?
Is that our week? I can't.
December 3rd?
TBD, we can...
I don't know.
I thought that's what we said, we wouldn't.
I think we probably would.
Just went remote.
Who do we have coming? We have Mr. Bishop, Mr. Keller, and Mrs. Parson. Is that correct? They're the three budget presentations next time? Do I have that correct?
I don't know, we haven't had planning yet for that, so I don't...
Why don't we look at it? You might need to look at, you might not be ready to make a decision right now, or we can always...
Yeah, I don't know, it's a good question.
On location.
If we meet in person, does that incur in cost? Will the custodial staff be off? Will that be...
I don't know if Mr. Person would move all his custodial staff to, like 8 to 4 or something, as opposed to having day people and night people.
Yeah.
He might.
Just let us know and we'll show up where we need to.
Let's do that in scheduling. So no other new agenda items, so items by consensus.
So as superintendent, I recommend the school committee approve the items by consensus as outlined in your agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Meg.
Second.
Second by Nancy. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And that passes, and we are at the adjournment phase. Anybody want to make a motion to adjourn? So moved. Motion by Meg. Second? Second. So second by Nancy. All those in favor of adjourning?
Yes.
Aye. And we are adjourned at 9:33. Our next meeting is December 3rd, TBD on location. And that's it. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Have a wonderful holiday, safe, no traveling, wearing masks, and social distancing. Thank you very much. Thank you, Susan, as well.
Thanks, everyone.
And thank you to